Democrats are on the verge of the unthinkable, losing a swing district in California. Politico reports the party is downplaying expectations in next week's special election for a congressional seat in the LA suburbs. And dare I say, this spells very bad news for Democrats come the general election in November. Now, this is a special election. The district was previously held by Democrat Katie Hill, who was forced to resign in disgrace amid a massive scandal. Now, a Republican is favored to win the seat, but Katie Hill was able to flip this from Republican to Democrat by 9 points, which means they have lost a major advantage. Now, of course, this could just be one district, but according to Democrats' own assessment, I think we're looking at a potential red wave. See, Democrats aren't too worried. It's a special election. Come November, they believe anti-Trump sentiment will drive more voter turnout, resulting in the district going back to the Democrats. But voter enthusiasm between Joe Biden and Donald Trump it's night and day. I mean, people who come out for Trump, boy, do they come out for Trump. You see, according to the New York Times, one of the reasons the Republicans lost the House in 2018 was because Trump supporters didn't turn out in large enough numbers. And anti-Donald Trump sentiment fueled a Democratic push. If they think they're going to win this district back in a Trump election year, I think they're completely wrong. So as they come out and say the general election is going to change things for us and help us out, I think they're missing the big picture. In fact, data suggests it's going to go the other direction. What's even more shocking is that the numbers we're getting so far are from mail-in voting. And a lot of Republicans are concerned that mail-in voting will result in voter fraud. In fact, it is true. In some states, they saw massive voter turnout due to mail-in voting. In Michigan, for instance, their May elections saw a major voter turnout when everything was done by absentee ballot. But consider this. If there's a lot of older people who are scared to go out and vote, who often don't go out and vote, it may actually be an even bigger increase for Trump supporters. That's maybe what we're seeing here. Now, a lot of people, I've said this in the past, that I think mail-in voting is dangerous for Republicans because it'll turn out the youth vote who normally don't vote. Republicans are concerned about fraud. But it looks like based on this one district, which favored Clinton by 7 points, voter turnout for the Republican is even higher. Now, I know this is a very specific district that may be very angry at their disgraced Democratic representative, and that's why they're flipping to the Republicans. But I think it's fair to say when Trump supporters turn out to vote for Trump, they're going to write R across the board, check every box for the Republicans, and give a massive red wave to the Republicans. Now, I was wrong in 2018, but I was wrong because I discounted the Trump base. I thought it was the Republicans when in reality, in 2016, Republicans did well because of Donald Trump. Without Trump on the ticket in 2018, many of these voters didn't show up and the Democrats, they won. It is fair to point, however, I have data showing that according to polling and fundraising, Republicans are actually in a very bad position. So we've got two different kinds of speculation. Hard polling and fundraising data suggesting the Democrats are set to win even more in the House and maybe even threaten the Republican Senate majority. But if you look by Trump base, the Trump favorability and approval rating, I mean, it might go to the Republicans. So it's really going to come down to your personal bias. But let's read this and then you can make up your mind. The first story on Democrats' pending defeat, which is shocking to many. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are several ways you can give, but the best thing you can do is share this video because YouTube props up the mainstream media and they actually restrict content like mine. If you really do like my content and want to support it, sharing it in any way possible really does help. It's substantially more powerful than any recommendation algorithm. But if you just want to watch, make sure to hit the subscribe button, the like button, the notification bell, and then cross your fingers hoping YouTube will actually recommend my content to you. Politico reports California Republicans may be on the verge of something they haven't done in more than 2 decades, capturing a congressional seat from Democrats in the nation's most populous state. Tuesday's special election runoff in the Los Angeles suburbs, which is taking place because of former Rep. Katie Hill's resignation last year, has Democrats bracing for defeat in a district they flipped by 9 points in the 2018 midterms, armed with a highly touted recruit and an older, less diverse electorate than in the general elections. Republicans feel they are on the verge of an upset. But I actually think what we're seeing here will have some kind of effect or does represent a potential change in the rest of these moderate districts. You see, Democrats were able to flip many districts that Donald Trump won. Why? These Democrats were running on kitchen table issues. We're not going to play politics. We're not going to play partisanship. We're going to focus on the economy, healthcare, improving your lives, immigration. But what happened when they actually got elected? They went straight for impeachment. And that took up almost everyone's time, scandal after scandal. Now these districts, in my opinion, might actually flip back because they feel betrayed. It could be that's why this district is going for the Republican, or it could just be that Katie Hill really embarrassed this district. I guess we can only wait and find out, but let's read more. Private polls show the race in the state's 25th district is within just a few points, and Democrats are already downplaying expectations for their nominee, State Assemblywoman Christy Smith, citing depressed turnout in the midst of a pandemic and the negative impact of the scandal surrounding Hill, who resigned amid inappropriate behavior. Their battle plan: hope for the best next week, then try again in 6 months in the rematch, when Democrats expect their voters will show up with the presidential election on the ballot. Quote, "We don't underestimate how much of a Republican-leaning district this could be in May, but that will be a different electorate in November," Rep. Pete Aguilar, D. California, said, noting that the winner will serve only a limited time in Congress. "We don't get in this to lose a race, but I do think that in November, Christie will be successful. But I could make the same argument for Trump. Yes, the electorate will be different. But if you're already losing to the Republicans, don't you realize Trump supporters will be coming out as well? And there is no enthusiasm for Joe Biden." On that alone, if that's their argument, I actually think many more districts might actually flip back to the Republicans. Of course, that's just speculation based on cultural behaviors or cultural issues and these particular attitudes. It may be when we're looking at the private polling. I mean, the data suggests good news for Democrats, but let's read on. They say yet a victory by Republican Mike Garcia, a 44-year-old former naval aviator and defense contractor, would provide a jolt of energy to the GOP's efforts to reclaim some of its lost suburban territory, even as the party's chances of recapturing the House majority appear to be dwindling. The close race is remarkable in part because voters in the district, which spans the northern part of Los Angeles suburbs, backed Hillary Clinton by 7 points 2 years prior, and President Donald Trump is still highly unpopular there. One Democratic survey found his favorability ratings underwater by double digits. Those same conditions could be present in several key seats that Republicans hope to flip back. And that's actually bad news for Republicans because this was held by a Republican before Katie Hill, and they did not like Donald Trump. Quote, "It is not a unique district. It is similar to many of the districts that we won in the fall," said one Democratic consultant who works on House races. "This was an anti-Trump response district. And if we're ebbing in those districts, we need to find out why. We can't just brush it off." And that is the big picture. This district is not unique. If Republicans are already winning, perhaps we're getting a glimpse of what's to come. A Republican winning in this district that is not unique, and then Donald Trump's voter base turning out in droves in November. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know for sure. That's just my speculation. They say because of the coronavirus, the election will be conducted almost entirely by mail, and ballot return tallies thus far, ballots must be postmarked by Tuesday and received by Friday in order to be counted, have only contributed to Democrats' fears. The electorate so far is older, less diverse, and more likely to favor the GOP. Of more than 118,000 returned ballots counted as of Friday, 44% are from registered Republicans, and just 36% are from Democrats, according to Paul Mitchell, the vice president of Political Data, Inc., a bipartisan company that analyzes voter data. Now I'm going to stop right there, right? Because I've said I believe that the mail-in ballots, which the Democrats are very, very much pushing for, would favor them because it will light up youth voters who can't be bothered to go out. Your ballot arrives in the mail. Your parents say, make sure you vote. And the young people go, oh, fine, I guess. Normally, the young people wouldn't actually go out and vote, but they receive that ballot in the mail. They fill it out. Perhaps I'm wrong, actually. Perhaps even if young people receive mail-in ballots, and let's be real, because the youth vote spans, 18 to 29, which means many of these people are living on their own, they might get that mail-in ballot, throw it in a pile, and go back to playing video games. Whereas the older voters, regardless, are still more likely to vote. I think it's fair to say that if mail-in ballots are going to increase voter turnout, they'll likely increase voter turnout for everyone. I think Democrats were hoping for an advantage. They seem to want to change the rules every time because, well, they're losing. They want to abolish the Electoral College. Now they want mail-in voting. I think it's fair to argue that they want mail-in voting because of the coronavirus outbreak. But that still very much favors older voters who would be scared to turn out and vote. And now we're seeing, well, it looks like the Republicans are winning with mail-in ballots. Here's what they say. Look at the age breakdown, Mitchell said in an interview, pointing to turnout rates that showed that 15% of voters under 35 years old have returned their ballots thus far, compared to 49% of those 65 and older. That's a big deal. The Latino population is pretty significant here, but they're turning out at half the rate of white voters. Privately, Democrats are pessimistic about their odds. The DCCC has spent over $1 million on TV ads boosting Smith after the March 3rd primary, but the cavalry of outside groups that typically drop millions in special elections has largely sat out of the race. Democrats maintain that the GOP advantage will evaporate in November when turnout will return to normal levels. Democrats have a voter registration advantage of nearly 30,000 in the district. I think that's why a lot of groups are kind of pushing the pause button, said Aguilar, who co-chairs the DCCC's program for top offensive targets. And I think it's a realization that the dynamics in this race in November are going to just be very different and lean our way significantly. Well, you can argue a few things. Perhaps no one is turning out, and we're seeing a real advantage for Republicans. Or perhaps the Republicans are really turning out, which means come November, they're going to be at a major disadvantage. I don't see reason to believe the latter. I think what we're seeing is a Republican advantage, probably due to the fact that Katie Hill disgraced the district, and probably due to the fact that, well, these people voted for kitchen table issues and got nothing but impeachment. But take a look at this story from Politico as well. Cash-rich Democrats tighten grip on House majority. House GOP recruiting misses and poor fundraising are hampering the party's chances to win back the chamber in November. That may be true. Unfortunately, I don't think this is what matters come election time. I do not believe that hard polling numbers necessarily are good news are a good indicator of what's going to happen. I think sentiment. I think the Democrats were right. Come November, you are going to see a different electorate. But as we know, enthusiasm for Biden and Trump is absurd. It's a 19-point advantage for Trump. I don't think the cash really matters all that much. Take a look at this tweet, which I find absolutely fascinating, from Ross Barkin. Andrew Cuomo's approval rating has surged beyond 80%. New York is the global epicenter for COVID-19, and there's little the government did well to contain the virus in its early stages. 20,000 plus people have died. It is truly one of the most remarkable PR coups of all time. Andrew Cuomo's polls are skyrocketing, even though he's failing. Now, there's another story I could highlight, the accusations against Joe Biden and the fact that in the polls, people still want to vote for Biden. Democrats don't care about the accusations against Biden. That says to me that for the most part, it doesn't matter policy-wise. What matters is cultural issues and people's feelings. People feel good watching Andrew Cuomo, so they support him even though he is floundering. And people don't like Donald Trump, so they're going to vote for Biden even though they don't like Biden either. This says to me that what you really need to count on, come November, is going to be how people feel about their candidates. And it's true. A lot of people really do not like Donald Trump. But think about it. Do you think people are going to show up because they're excited to vote for Joe Biden? No, of course not. Do you think people will show up to vote because they hate Donald Trump? Yes. But do you think more people will show up excited to vote for Donald Trump? It's hard to predict for sure because these are just speculative cultural issues. But I'm going to put my money on people wanting to vote for Donald Trump. We just saw the GOP primaries where Donald Trump was shattering records, even though no one had to go out and vote for him. And according to the New York Times, Trump's base is bigger today than it was when he first got elected. In fact, Donald Trump's favorability is substantially higher today than it was when he first got elected. I think that says to me what really matters is for Trump, against Trump. Does anything else really matter? Very, very little. I think very few people are actually going to be bothered with paying attention to policy. It's all about orange man good, orange man bad. Well, this story from Click on Detroit shows us that absentee voting leads to record turnout, Michigan's May election, and that California, according to the Daily Mail, Governor Newsom says all registered voters in the state will be asked to vote by mail in the November election, putting him at odds with Trump. They say that voter turnout, if it goes up, is good for Democrats. But there has been another story by the New York Times that, no, not really. Voter turnout may actually benefit Republicans, and that's what we might be seeing in Katie Hill's district. Here we have a story from the New York Times. Back in July of 2019, the Republicans lost their typical midterm turnout advantage in 2018, even though they didn't give up some of their traditional demographic advantages. Young and non-white voter turnout was markedly higher than it had been in 2014, but still lower than that of older and white voters. Registered Republicans were likelier to turn out than registered Democrats, according to data from L2, a nonpartisan political data firm. These traditional Republican demographic advantages were canceled out, and in some cases reversed by two new Democratic advantages. The low turnout among whites without a college degree, bolstered by Democrats in much of the country, allowing college-educated whites to make up a larger share of the electorate. As a result, the voters who turned out in 2016 but stayed home in 2018 were more likely to approve of the president. He had around a 50% approval rating among these non-voters in the Times Siena data. The increase in turnout among the young in 2018 came overwhelmingly from anti-Trump voters, giving the Democrats a wide advantage among voters under age 45. The advantage was largest among those 18 to 24. Now, think about what I've just shown you with the New York Times data, the story from Katie Hill. They think a different electorate, the anti-Trump vote, will get them the victory. No. In 2018, according to the New York Times, Trump voters stayed home. That's why they won. Yes, the anti-Trump vote showed up and they were able to win, but also consider Trump supporters didn't show up either. Now, coming into 2020 with Donald Trump on the ballot, I think we may actually see a red wave. Again, I don't know for sure. That's why I want to be very, very clear. I was very wrong in 2018. I didn't predict this. I thought Trump supporters were going to come out. But they're not Republican supporters. They're Trump supporters who come out. The story from the New York Times says huge turnout is expected in 2020, so which party would it benefit? Democrats typically gain from a broader electorate in presidential races, but that pattern is not assured in the Trump era. That's what they really need to be considering. If they push for mail-in voting, it may be it benefits Donald Trump. If they think that this November election is going to help them, it's just going to help Donald Trump. So I want to show you this here from Vox. Now, Vox is lefty, and this is Matthew Iglesias. He says Donald Trump has never been popular. Trump stands out so strongly in the political landscape that takes often emerge that neglect to mention the fact that he had an opponent. But the central reality of the 2016 campaign is that both major parties' nominees were unusually unpopular. The typical scenario in the 21st century presidential campaigns has been for even the losing candidate to be viewed favorably by at least a narrow majority of the population. But 2016 gave us a unique scenario in which both nominees were underwater, leaving voters who approved of neither candidate as a crucial swing constituency. Here's what we saw in Michigan with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. The Bernie supporters thought Bernie Sanders would crush Joe Biden because Bernie Sanders defeated Hillary Clinton. Something else happened. Joe Biden crushed Bernie Sanders. Why? Because Hillary Clinton was ridiculously unpopular. So it may actually be that with Joe Biden, a more neutral candidate or someone who's seen as just not Trump, Biden has a major advantage. And we may actually see people turn out and the Democrats may actually take everything back. But I'm going to push back a little bit and say I'm not entirely convinced. And it's because the New York Times upshot, it's the same writer I just showed you, says that Donald Trump's favorability in his base is larger than it was in 2016. Not only that, but over the past several years, Donald Trump has proven he really did make the economy work. Considering the economy is now in shambles, who better to fix it than Donald Trump? Now, of course, that's me actually being logical. And like I said, people are going to be voting based on how they feel about Donald Trump. We know that Donald Trump is drives voter turnout both anti and pro-Trump. Democrats are counting on a larger anti-Trump sentiment. Unfortunately for them, we see this from the Washington Examiner, 19-point enthusiasm gap. Trump supporters jazzed to vote. Biden's meh. And this is from April 29th. Now, it's not the same thing. Saying whether you want to vote for Biden is not the same thing as saying you want to vote against Trump. So the numbers may not be perfect. But I do believe that when the pollsters were asking people, who are you going to vote for? Oh, I'm going to vote for Biden. How excited are you? It could be that many of them are just excited to vote against Trump, or it could be they're not going to turn out at all because most people don't care. Donald Trump's approval rating is higher than it's been for the bulk of his presidency. He recently saw his highest approval rating ever in the aggregate. And Gallup recently has him at an approval rating higher than he's been, for the most part, tied for the highest he's ever had it. In which case, we're seeing something interesting. People don't blame him for the pandemic, but people did credit him for the economy, and they still do. Although there's a lot to criticize the president for, it looks like even to this day, his polling as it pertains to the economy is still doing really, really well. And Joe Biden just doesn't really have anything going for him. He's failing to attract young voters despite pivot to the left. The progressives aren't going to come out and vote for Joe Biden, so he's going to lose a massive part of his voter base. And you know what that means? That means Joe Biden will. That means the voters are going to the voting. Voters are going to the booth, and they will either check D across the board or R across the board. But while Trump has massive enthusiasm, Biden can't muster youth vote. So it's not even about whether or not people don't like Trump. Young voters won't go out at all. And if they don't go out at all, which is kind of to be expected, that means a lot of Democrats aren't going to get support in turn. I think it's fair to point out, man, look, I know a lot of people might want to argue that people go out to vote for their congressional candidate. They really don't. The turnout for the midterms, it's lower than for the presidential election. It's one of the reasons why the Republicans lost. So come 2020, because the Democrats could not muster an enthusiastic candidate, they're going to lose everything. That's why they should have probably chosen Bernie, I guess. You know why? Moderate Democrats would hold their nose and vote for Bernie. Young people would still not really come out, but more so likely would for Bernie. They could have potentially held on to the House and maybe even made some gains in the Senate. Not because, they could have defeated Donald Trump. Bernie, I don't think he would have. But because they would have gotten more votes for their House and their Senate candidates. They decided to put up Joe Biden. And we saw the argument, stay alive, Joe Biden. If you think that's going to be enough, you're wrong. We're not just talking about the presidency. We're talking about everything else. And everything else is going to flip Republican. Well, at least that's my speculation. I can't really tell you for sure. I honestly don't know. But we have seen that in some places in the Democratic primary, voter turnout was really, really low. If they're going to rely on in-person voting, voter turnout is not good news for Democrats. Especially with the ongoing pandemic, things might get really bad. But if they do switch to mail-in votes, they have seen record turnout. And I'll wrap it up by reiterating the point from the beginning. While Republicans are concerned there will be fraud, I think it's a fair concern. How do you track all these ballots? It looks like, based on Katie Hill's district, mail-in voting isn't going to be a major benefit to the Democrats. In fact, it might actually still just help Republicans. It's hard to know for sure. You can make your assessment based on any of this data. Is it that the Democrats are going to win because they have tons of cash? Some Republicans actually think so. But the Republicans quoted in this Politico story that argue Republicans are in a bad position are looking at the traditional data, fundraising and polls. They're not taking into consideration that many of Trump's voters don't care about these things, are left out of these things, and vote because they just love Trump. What did we see more than anything else? When it came to the primary for Donald Trump, he was shattering records, even though there was no reason to vote for him. Democrats were seeing some good turnout, some bad turnout, which is strange because they had a whole field of Democrats to choose from. If Bernie supporters came out, Yangs, Tulsi's, whoever else, Klobuchar, you'd think there would be substantially more voters for the Democrats. And they're only in some areas, it was only slightly in favor of Democrats. Trump shattered records when no one had to show up. So there's my prediction for now, which could change. I think in 6 months, when all of Trump's voters come out, they're going to sweep the board. We'll see, though. Hubris will be the downfall of either side. If Democrats think they got someone in the bag, they will lose, and the same goes for Trump supporters. The best thing you can do is make sure you go out and you vote for who you want to win. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at youtube.com/TimCastNews, 6 p.m., and I will see you all then.